Thank you to everyone watching for also tuning in. And I have my beautiful friend. She's so beautiful inside and out. Her name is Morayo. Maybe you did a better job introducing yourself. Please go ahead.
Okay, so my name is Morayo Adenuga. I actually would classify myself as a young lady in my mid-20s. I went to school, did my pre-med. I worked in the medical research space for 2.5 years, and now I'm going back to school to get my master's.
Thank you so much for being here, and I appreciate your time. So we'll just dive right in. We want to talk about growth. As human beings, we have to grow. If you're not growing, you're probably dying. When a tree is not growing, it's dying. And if we have to grow, it's something that doesn't happen naturally, or let me say there's a natural aspect of growth, right? But then there is a way when you actually feed yourself, you'll be able to grow well. And so we just want to find out what are some of the tips that we can use to make sure that we are growing, whether there are challenging situations going all around, whether things are going well. In either way, there are ways you can make sure that you keep yourself growing, either spiritually, mentally, in your career, all around. There are tools that you can use to ensure that you keep growing. So that is what we want to talk about today. So, Mario, if you can kind of get us started on what your views are on what growing is.
Okay, for me, like we talked a little bit about earlier, I see growth in two aspects. There are two aspects of holistic growth, in my opinion. I would say there is natural growth, the non-intentional growth. The example I would give is everyone ages. So you grow in age, your birthday comes, you're a year older. So that's natural growth. It's just how God has made it to be. But there's also intentional growth, which I would call it, or non-natural growth, which is, for me, I think it's growth that you have to fuel to, see it grow to an optimum level. So the example I was giving Sister Matilda earlier was a documentary I had watched a while back. It was about a mother who had a child, and she actually locked her child up in a room for 7 years. So the child was 7 years old. The child had never gone out, never seen the sun, never interacted really with anyone except for her, the mother. And eventually the police got involved. It was a huge thing. Of course, it was a documentary.
Right.
Eventually, what they found out was that even though the child was 7 years old, had the build of a 7-year-old, actually did not know how to talk, could not walk, couldn't do the things that 7-year-olds would do. She had the mind of a baby and also the mannerisms of a baby.
Right.
And so for me, that just brings to the fact that, okay, actually, the natural growth and the intentional growth kind of have to work hand in hand to be able to see the holistic growth we're talking about.
Exactly. Right.
So for instance, in that example I gave, if like every other child that we see, we've seen that if those children are not exposed to the things they're exposed to, they wouldn't actually develop the way that we think they would. So I actually personally believe that they work hand in hand for us to be able to see fruits of the growth.
Right. And I like the example that you gave and the word that you use, holistic, because even as humans, our lives are multifaceted, right? And I remember there was a time I was sitting on, what do you call it? It was an office chair that has those wheels that you can move around, but it's just 3, and one was broken. When it's standing there, it looks okay, but when you sit on it and it tilts, it will just throw it up. So there is need for balance, even in our lives. We need to be able to grow in the right proportion in the different areas of our lives in order to be a whole person. Yes. And so, so now coming back to the intentionality of growing as a person, I think sometimes we have an idea of who or what we want to be, but then we don't know where to start from. We don't know what to do, or especially now in COVID situation, right? Like people are in lockdowns or people have lost their jobs and they feel like, well, how am I going to grow professionally? What are some of the things that you think we have to keep in mind in order to grow in the different areas of our lives? And you can pick any of the area that you think is important to you.
Okay, it's funny that you say pick any of the areas because for me, I think that the principles, like
it applies across.
Apply across board. That I mean, this is what I think for growth generally. And for me, I had written a few points down for what I think those things are across board that we can do to, or I have done in the past to grow. So one of the major points, I have 3 major points, and the first major point is growth should be intentional, like we were saying, right? Where and under that I have 3 points. The first one is self-reflection. So that one is something that you honestly have to do. Let me give an example. COVID-19 is something that just hit out of nowhere, right? So a lot of people, they were moving on a particular wavelength before COVID-19 hit. If you actually, in times like that, didn't go back and self-reflect, you actually would not be able to adapt to the, new situations around you. Right? And that can apply to anything at all. Let's say spiritually you want to grow, right? If you don't actually sit down and evaluate yourself and say, okay, I'm saying I want to grow. Where are the areas that I see the need for this growth? Or what are the areas I feel that I am lacking, that I need to grow? So I think where self-reflection comes in, and with self-reflection comes adaptation, it comes being able to be flexible, it comes certain levels of changes. But the key here is to be very honest with yourself, because at the end of the day, you are the one evaluating yourself. And if you're not honest, you are not going to achieve the growth that you want to achieve.
That's true. That's a very great point that you bring out. And I think sometimes many of us, it's either we get too busy that we do not even take time to pause to reflect. And then the other thing probably is we are afraid of what we will find when we reflect, because that means we have to do the work.
This honesty might come in a little bit where you might lie to yourself just so that it doesn't seem like maybe whatever you're evaluating is that bad,
Right.
So yeah, I think sometimes we get afraid of the reality.
Wow. That's a very great point. So definitely reflect on yourself, and reflection goes into getting to know yourself, really, knowing your strength and knowing your weaknesses, and determining that, okay, I need to get better in this area. That's an amazing point. Okay, what else do you have for us?
Well, under intentionality as well, I have quantifying your growth. This is something that for me, for the longest time, I did not do. So let's say I have a vision for myself, right? I would just write down this vision and I'm like, oh yeah, this is what I want to do, or this is where I want to be. But I did not write down the steps it would take to get to where I need to be. I did not write down, the resources I might need, how much time I need to put into, that particular vision. And all of that is under, for me, quantifying the growth that you're looking for. So let's say someone wants to be better with time management. And right now they get to places an hour late, right? If quantifying your growth can look like, okay, I want to cut down how late I am from maybe an hour to 30 minutes, right? And when it comes to quantifying, you have to be very realistic with yourself, which is taking steps, small steps, which eventually will get you to the big goal or the big vision, right? So you can cut it down to, okay, I want to, be 30, I don't want to be more than 30 minutes late to any place. You want to write down what it would take for you to do that based off of where you are right now, which is where initially the self-reflection came in. So where you are right now, and then what it'll take for you to, cut down that time.
Right.
And then for every other stage of growth, you do the same thing until you get to the big picture of where you envisioned yourself.
That's very true.
That's one thing for me I struggled with for a very long time. And I just saw that, okay, a lot of times when I say, oh, I want to do this, I just hop at maybe the last, the final destination. And after like a week or so, I'm overwhelmed.
Right. Yes. And I think it also goes back to it being a process and being specific as to the point that you want to reach. So definitely growth doesn't just happen overnight, right? Growth happens with time, and you have to be intentional and be specific as to the areas that you need to grow after you have reflected on yourself and say, okay, this is where I need to grow in time management.
Right.
These are what I have to do. Right. Like for me, one of the things that I had to do, like when I wanted to commit to keeping fit or exercising, I know that in the morning when I have to wake up, let's say 4:30 a.m., sleep is sweet around that time.
Right.
It's very sweet at 4:30 a.m. So there is no motivation whatsoever, especially during winter, to get up and all that. So I just have to make sure that I fold my workout clothes and put it by the door.
Exactly.
When I wake up, I am not now going to look for those clothes, because that itself would not motivate me to keep going. So the clothes are there, the shoe is there, and immediately I wake up, I know that, okay, this is what I'm going to do. The same thing goes for even if you want to be spiritually, grow spiritually, you have your Bible somewhere close by where when you wake up, you can easily access it. If you want to read more books, put the books where you can see them more often. So making sure that you are specific in your growth plan and know that it is a process, and you start from here and then you keep moving. Okay, so self-reflection, quantify your growth. Okay, what's next?
So those were the things I had under being intentional. Right. So the second main point I had here was that our growth should be fueled or it should be fed. So I mean, fuel as in like gas, putting gas in your car. So it should be fueled or fed. And under this, I have some points, but I'll just explain what I mean by that. That we should constantly invest in our areas of growth, right? That's what I mean by it should be fed. So the first thing I have here is books.
Yes.
I mean, reading in whatever area that you are trying to grow in is almost number one. I think that's why when they're sending kids to school, books, right? You teach them through books. I mean, now it's changing a little bit with the digital age. So even when they're teaching, it's still information, right? So I guess we can say that make sure you are getting the right information for the area that you're trying to grow in. And a good way is through books, some videos. There are so many things available to us through the internet these days. And so the first
almost everything is on the internet.
Actually, it looks like there's nothing you can't learn online. And with COVID, it's even made it like so much easier. It's to like the next level where every single thing is online.
On the internet,
So information is key with this. I would also say the other point I had under this was surrounding yourself with the right people. You don't want to surround yourself with people who, first of all, maybe are not growing, because it can, I guess, build a certain level of complacency in you. right? Like the saying says, very popular, you are the average of the closest 5 people to you.
Right.
It's actually real. And if it's a situation where you are the only one growing and become maybe the best among the people that you're surrounded by, there would be a point where you would be very complacent.
Yeah, and you are not challenged.
Yeah, you're not challenged. You're not motivated. So it's surrounding yourself. I believe that surrounding yourself with the right people is very, very important. Also, don't surround yourself with people who are dream killers or people who, you know, pull down goals or pull down
PhD.
Yes, like haters.
Pull him down. That's what they call them, PhD. Pull him or her down.
No. But yeah, once you see that kind of energy in someone, honestly, kind of distance yourself however you can. Especially in the areas of growth. I mean, you can maybe be the person's friend, but people you discuss your growth with, don't let them be people who will just discourage you and say, "Oh,
right,
do this." I'm sure by next week you will not be able to do it anymore.
Yeah. And I like that point, but I also want to point out the fact that there is a difference between someone criticizing you in a way to help you grow, and there are those who their intention is not that you grow. Their intention is that you come down to their level or be less than them. So I think it's key to be able to identify that difference, because sometimes some people classify anyone who criticizes them as a hater, right? Yeah, so it's not everyone who gives you a negative feedback.
That's very true.
To help you to grow. Yeah.
And the funny thing is, that was my next point on that feeding your growth. Be open to constructive criticism.
Yes.
So once it's not constructive criticism and it's hating or like someone just being a naysayer, then there's a problem with that. That comes from constructive criticism, where people who love you or people who want to see you succeed might see that, okay, there's an area that they feel that you're deficient in, and they point it out to you. It's good to also evaluate those things and see, okay, how can I be better at this thing that has been brought up to me? Because I also think it's important that we take those seriously. People are kind of our mirrors in life. We can't really see how we are. We might have an idea, but we get feedback from people, right? So it's good to also take constructive criticism into account when it comes to growth.
Right.
Yeah, so that was another point. And the last one I have on that one is seek counsel. I think that's also a big one, like seeking counsel from whether it's whatever area of growth actually that you're to grow in. There are people who you might have achieved the area that you want to get to, or have passed through wherever you are right now, and are on the other side, right? And so it's good to seek counsel from those people, because they can give you tips, they can give you information that you may not be able to get by yourself. Even the Bible promotes this. Like you see,
I was about to say in the book of Proverbs, yes.
You see it there a lot. I even have some written down here. Like if you're trying to grow spiritually, find Bible believing pastors, Christians that have passed through the stage that you're in. And I tell them that, okay, can you help me out? Can you, give me the information that I need to be able to get to this level I'm trying to get to? Counsel is very, very important, in my opinion.
Right.
The Bible as well. So God also sees the importance of counsel. I have on that feeding your growth.
Yeah, that's very powerful. And as you even said, feeding, like what came to my mind was that, and it also ties into what you initially said about investing in our growth. And you can see it as a seed, right? And we invest either with our money, we invest with our time as well. And when you feed or when you nurture, you can say, because we have nature, we talked about nature versus nurture, the one that is natural growth. And then if you nurture it, that is when you eventually begin to see the outcome. But what happens when you are feeding it, but it's not growing?
I think that's where, the counsel comes in, or even, I guess, surrounding yourself with the right people, right? For instance, you might somehow be feeding it in the way that would not be beneficial to, the area of growth you're trying to achieve. For example, I gave an example about myself and setting goals that were so far off. For me at that time, I did not have the information about setting, goals in a realistic way and setting like little steps to achieve what you want to achieve. But for me, I felt that I'm dreaming big. I'm doing the things that I've heard some people say. I'm dreaming big. I'm setting my goals, but I'm not achieving it. So it was not until I got the information about, the little steps matter. That's when, it started to work out for me. And so like that, we may actually not be getting the right information for the that we are trying to achieve if you're not seeing changes. So it might just be, okay, you might need to change your strategy. You might need to ask questions, take your matter to somebody. As a Christian, take your matter to God. Like, okay, God, look, I'm trying to change in this area. I'm trying to grow in this area. Please reveal to me where I'm lacking. But I think at that point, we need to ask questions on what we might be doing wrong.
Yes, and I love the answer that you gave, because I also think it brings to bear the fact that it's cyclical, right? It's cyclical in nature, in that if it's not working, you go back to reevaluating yourself, which is the very first point that you give. So growth is a process, but sometimes it becomes cyclical in that you reevaluate yourself. You see that, okay, I need to grow in my spiritual life. And then you do all these things. You reinvest in your time, reinvest your time to make sure that you are growing in that area. But then sometimes you may not be growing as much as you think you should be going, or you realize that you are lacking in another area. I don't know if I'm covering. Okay. You realize that you are lacking in another area, and then you go back again and reevaluating. And I think even personally in my life, one of the things that I have realized is those little steps of just starting, going, coming back, starting, you're actually moving up like this, right? You are growing, but then sometimes you might think you are not, but you are actually growing until it gets to a point and you realize, wow, I have grown. Yeah.
And the other thing I want to add to that, I think that also it's important to document the little changes, because sometimes we
celebrate. Yes.
Yeah, we might miss them when maybe we are just trying to look at the big picture. But if we document the little changes, we'll actually see that, oh yeah, actually I changed, I grew a little bit.
Yeah.
As big as I thought,
Right.
But we would notice that, okay, actually we have grown just a little bit, like you were saying, that it may not be this direct
good. Yeah.
It might be that, okay, you just keep going until you get to the level.
To the point that, yes. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm just going to give a summary from most of the things that you talked about. So if you're listening, in whatever area you want to grow, make sure that you reevaluate yourself and know, the areas where you specifically need to grow. So you quantify, be specific about the things that you want to grow in, and then take the steps to grow in those areas. And you have to be intentional. It doesn't come naturally in all. My internet is not doing as well today, but we still thank God. Yeah, it is well. Okay. So going back to what you were talking about, that we have to make sure, what was the word that you used for the first point, and being intentional? Is it
being intentional,
like about knowing yourself?
Self-reflection.
Self-reflection. So have a self-reflection. Make sure that you are quantifying your growth goals, let me say. Be specific so that you'll be able to even tell when you are growing. Because if you're not specific, when you're growing, you cannot tell that you're growing in those areas. And you have to be intentional to sow the seeds, invest your time, invest resources, talk to people. I think sometimes we think we can do it all on our own, but we truly cannot. And it doesn't have to be people in person. I mean, lots of people have written books, and when you read a book, it's just like you are sitting there with a person, and the person is telling you, they tell you their secrets, not so that you won't make the same mistakes that they made, so that you won't take as long as it took for them to find out those secrets. And that would help you to grow, faster, so that you can move on to growing in other areas of your life as well.
The last thing I just had here was, like, I guess as Christians, for us, we should make sure that we're taking advantage of what is available to us, like what God has made available to us, which is His Word, the grace that He has made available to us, that we can do all things through Him who strengthens us. So, that's the grace that comes from Him, gives us strength. And also we can find motivation, we can find encouragement and comfort in His Word as well. So as Christians, when it comes to growth, no matter the area, right? Because you can always, be discouraged in one way, or you can feel like, okay, you're a little bit overwhelmed by whatever growth that you're seeking. But we can always find a push in the Word of God. And that's the thing I love about the Word of God. It's so multifaceted. Like, there's nothing under the sun that you cannot find information for in the Bible. So I think for me, that was just the last point I had, that as Christians, we should make sure that we're taking advantage of what God has made available to us when it comes to growth.
That's very true. That is very true. And I love that you ended with that, because the grace of God truly enables us. And I always say, I believe we can do nothing really without God. And if we ask for grace, especially even in the areas where we feel we are weak, right? Apostle Paul says that in our weakness, He makes us strong. And so those are the areas that even His power and His might shines the most. And asking God for it, He says if we ask Him, He will give it to us. And like you said, there is nothing about your life that is not in the Bible, whether it's financial. Many times I say, why didn't I take this much more serious, much earlier? Yes, like take it literally, and it will change your life. So whether you're a Christian or even if you are not, I mean, it's an opportunity for you. Once you are still living, you still have an opportunity. Just take the Bible and, look for answers. You'll find them. It's in there. If you feel like you need to be convinced that the Bible is true, God can convince you, but you have to first know what He's saying to be convinced. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your research and your experience as well, on ways that we can grow as people. And like I said, if you are not growing, then you are dying. There are so many tools available, people, books that we need to make use of the Bible as well. It's available. And by God's grace, we'll all grow in leaps and bounds and will bring glory to His name. Amen.